Rifkin, thank you very much for providing us some of your time here today, and really want to talk to you about the areas of the next evolution of the economies and of the sectors with which we live in. And your speech in World Workplace in Houston was very powerful, and people really responded in a positive way. So I'd like you to explain a little bit more about what you've been involved in Europe and potentially Canada, other parts of the world, so that people understand really what your focus is and what you want to do.
All right. Well, let me say it's a pleasure to be with you, and I've really enjoyed meeting so many new people at the International Facility Management Association. Really a very nice group of folks who are right at the cutting edge of this new transformation that we're going to be talking about today. Let me first give you a little bit of insight of what I've been doing over the last 17 years or so. I advised the European Commission and the European Union and many heads of state over the past 17 years in our 28-member state union in the EU. And in recent years, I've also been advising the leadership of the People's Republic of China. In that regard, I've been privileged to be a principal architect of the EU's long-term economic development plan for the 21st century, which we call Smart Europe. Commensurately, I've been engaged with the leadership of the People's Republic of China in their long-term economic development plan, which they call China Internet Plus. These plans are very similar, almost identical. The EU plan, Smart Europe, was formally launched in February of last year. We have a 631 billion euro fund for this infrastructure transition to this new economy. And the China Internet Plus plan was formally commenced in the 13th five-year plan, which has been in place now for quite a while. So that's kind of a background. Let me say that we've had a very robust conversation over the years in both the European Union and China on where the economy is heading. And I think we're all very clear on a few central points. First, there's no doubt that GDP is rising at a slower rate in recent years. And the reason is productivity has been declining all over the world in every region over the past 15 years. And so we're seeing a lot of high structural unemployment, especially among a younger generation that's not able to find their place in the 21st century workforce. So it's clear that we are at a turning point, if you will, an inflection point for the global economy that has served us for so long. And of course, now this global economic crisis, if you will, is compounded by a far more profound crisis, and that is after 2 centuries of the Industrial Revolution, we have spewed massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and methane and nitrous oxide to make this industrial way of life, and now we find ourselves in real-time climate change. And the most critical part of this crisis is that climate change changes the water cycles of the Earth. This is probably the most challenging moment in our history as a species on Earth. You know, we're the watery planet. Our ecosystems developed over millions of years based on the cloud covers and the water cycles that cross our ecosystem. And the problem is this. For every 1 degree that the temperature goes up on the planet from CO2 emissions and other global warming emissions, the atmosphere is actually sucking up 7% more precipitation from the ground because the heat is forcing the precipitation into the clouds. This means we're getting more concentrated precipitation in our clouds and more violent, extreme, and completely unpredictable water events. And I think everyone listening to this will be familiar with the fact that we're getting blockbuster winter snows. We're getting extreme flooding all over the world, floods that we used to say would occur once every 1,000 years are now the new normal each year. We're getting drought across entire regions of the world and wildfires in the summer on every continent, and Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes. So what's happening is our ecosystems cannot catch up to this exponential curve that's throwing our water cycles off. And this is throwing us into the sixth extinction event of life on Earth. And this is and most people, I would say, this is probably the most dramatic story we've ever faced in terms of our future. And I don't think anybody knows about it except a handful of academicians and policy leaders. We've had 5 extinction events in the last 450 million years, well before humans were here. And each time, those extinction events were wipeouts. And they came quick, and it took over 10 million years each time to get more new life back on the planet. So our scientists are now telling us we're in the sixth extinction event, and we could lose over half the species of life on Earth in the next 7 or 8 decades. To put this in perspective, the last time we had a species extinction event of this magnitude was 65 million years ago, and it took thousands of years. So I don't think we are fully aware of the urgency of this moment. So the question we began to ask in the European Union and China is, what do we do? And it's clear that we needed a new economic vision for the world that would be compelling, and a game plan to deploy the vision that would be quick and be realized both in the developing and industrial countries. And our goal was to get off the fossil fuel industrial revolution within 30 to 40 years all over the world, because we realized we were on a tight time deadline. And if we are not able to do that, the consequences for our species and our fellow creatures in the earth may be apocalyptic. So in my work with the European Union, China, I have a kind of a different read on how the great economic paradigm shifts occur, and that analysis has been taken up in both the EU and China. If you take a look at all the great economic paradigm shifts in history, which is important, because if we know how economic paradigm shifts occurred in the past, we're going to get a roadmap and a compass at IFMA and every other part of our economy on how to move forward. So what's very interesting anthropologically is when you look at the 7 or 8 great economic paradigm shifts in history, they actually share a common denominator. That at a moment of time, 3 defining technologies will emerge across the society and converge to create what we call in engineering a general purpose technology platform, an infrastructure that fundamentally transforms the way society manages, powers, and moves its economic, social, and political life. And here are those 3 technology revolutions. Number 1, new communication technologies to more efficiently manage the economic and social and political life. Number 2, new sources of energy to more efficiently power the economic, social, and political life. And number 3, new modes of transportation and logistics to more efficiently move the economic, social, and political life. So when communication revolutions join with new energy regimes and new modes of mobility, it actually changes this way society manages, powers, and moves its economic activity. It changes temporal spatial orientation. It changes economic models. It changes governance. And it changes the built environment. It changes the habitats that we live in. It changes the way we live, the way we work. It changes our living patterns, our residential, our industrial, commercial living patterns fundamentally. So to put this in perspective, so it isn't too philosophical, if you take a look at the first and second industrial revolutions in the 19th and 20th century, they follow along this paradigm curve. So in the 19th century, the Brits led us into the first industrial revolution with a communication revolution, an energy revolution, and a mobility and logistics revolution that changed the built environment. The Brits introduced steam power printing, no more manual print presses. Steam power printing was a big leap forward in productivity because we could mass produce brochures and newspapers and magazines and journals and cheap books for public education and schooling. Big leap forward in productivity for communication. And then the Brits introduced a telegraph system across the British Isles. And those 2 communication technologies, steam power printing and the telegraph converged in Britain with a new source of energy, coal, very cheap coal. And then the Brits harvested with their own invention the steam engine, and then what was really ingenious is they put the steam engine on rails for locomotives and national transport. So this shift in the way Britain managed power to move economic activity fundamentally changed the built environment. For the first time, we moved to London became the first city of 1 million people since ancient Rome. And because of the communication, energy, mobility infrastructure, it favored dense urban environments. We began to see 5-story walk-up apartment buildings and skyscrapers, and the workforce had to be very, very close to where the manufacturing was, as well as where they lived, because of hub-to-hub rail traffic. The railroads dictated the clustered population centers. If you go to the 20th century, the United States supported that second industrial revolution with another convergence of communication, energy, mobility, and logistics. The telephone was a huge leap forward in communication. I would say probably more significant even than the internet today, because it came out of nowhere. Instant communication by electricity, speed of light across the world. And later radio and television. So those communication technologies in the U.S. converged with a new source of energy, cheap Texas oil. Then Henry Ford put everyone on roads with cars, buses, and trucks, internal combustion engine powered by the new fossil fuel energies. That changed the built environment again. It changed our business models. It changed the way we manage power and move economic life. But it really also changed our built environment because with the internal combustion engine run on fossil fuel energies, and with the electricity revolution in the telephone, we moved from very centralized urban environments to more, if you will, flat urban suburban corridors. With the road system, we developed out the suburban build-outs and shopping centers and travel and tourism and everything that went with that revolution. It was a change in the way we lived, our residential living patterns, our commercial establishments, our manufacturing as well. Just to give you one example, in the first industrial revolution, all of your manufacturing facilities had to be close to the rail yards, for sure, so that you could have the transport. But in the second industrial revolution, with the road systems becoming the new logistics medium, we could move manufacturing to rural areas as long as they were off the interstate highway systems. So that was a big shift in transportation that really shifted our demographics, all shifting our built environment. When we looked at this, the first and second industrial revolutions in Europe and China, it was clear that the second industrial revolution has peaked. The productivity has peaked. The infrastructure has peaked in its productivity. Therefore, regardless of whatever new goods and services we put out in the marketplace, if the businesses are plugged into that second industrial revolution infrastructure of centralized telecommunications, fossil fuel nuclear power, internal combustion, transportation, logistics, we can't get any more productivity out of that system. It peaked at around 18 to 20% aggregate efficiency. That's why productivity is declining. We're living off a 20th century second industrial revolution infrastructure that cannot give us any more productivity gains. That's the nub of it. So we began to talk about the third industrial revolution in Europe and China, a new convergence of communication, energy, mobility, and logistics that would change the way we manage power and move economic life. And here's essentially what this third industrial revolution is all about. This is a digital revolution in communication, energy, and mobility. We are 25 years into the World Wide Web. Everyone has their cell phones. Half the human race is connected, communicating at very low fixed and marginal cost. It's been a revolution. Now this digital internet communication revolution is just now beginning to converge in Europe and China with a digitalized renewable energy internet that acts just like the communication internet. So we now have millions of people are now producing their own solar and wind electricity where they live, where they work, and they're either using it offsite or they're sending it back to a digitalized energy internet that acts just like the communication information internet, so that it can be shared across nations and across continents. And now these two internets, this communication internet, which is converging with the renewable energy internet, is now converging with a digitalized mobility and logistics internet made of electric and fuel cell vehicles and car sharing networks and truck sharing networks. And those vehicles are running on renewable energies, very low to near zero marginal cost. And they are going to be autonomous and driverless within the next 5 years. So those three internets, all digital, the communication internet, the renewable energy internet, the mobility and transport internet, to manage power and move economic life, is fundamentally changing the built environment. This is what's crucial to IFMA members. We are, these three internets, communication, energy, and mobility internet, they ride on top of a platform called the Internet of Things. So we're putting sensors across the built environment. Sensors in our farms, our barns, our warehouses, our distribution centers, our smart roads, our smart homes, our smart vehicles. And these sensors are picking up big data. And by 2030, we're going to build out a global brain and nervous system that's sort of an extension of our society. So you have to look at GPS guidance, that's kind of the brain, GPS satellites. They synchronize all of these sensors and synchronize the data so that we can begin to create a very streamlined third industrial revolution that will dramatically increase our productivity, reduce our ecological footprint, and our fixed and marginal cost in managing power and move economic life. The key is the sensors are, this is the Internet of Things. It's not in the cloud. The Internet of Things are the buildings. They are the buildings. So what we are beginning to see is that every building in the world is a node. And those nodes are where the Internet of Things is going to be implanted. They're already being inserted. So every building, home, office, factory, farm, becomes a node, and each building becomes a distributed data center, not the kind of centralized data centers you see at Google and Facebook, but everyone's going to be a data center, all distributed. And those nodes are not only going to be distributed data centers, they're also going to be micro power generation sites on or around those building sites, homes, offices, factories, farms, etc. And they're also, all those buildings are going to be transportation service system stations for electric charging outlets and fuel cell outlets. In addition, all of those buildings will be equipped with Internet of Things technology so that they can interact and cluster in blockchains across communities, across regions, across continents. This, in a sense, is the framework of the next revolution, and it changes fundamentally the way we manage power and move economic life, but it also changes the globalization. Because the first and second industrial revolution globalizations, those platforms, those infrastructures were designed to be centralized and proprietary and closed and vertically integrated to return the proper investment to shareholders. The interesting thing about this third industrial revolution, which is all digital, is designed to be architecturally distributed, not centralized. Its productivity is optimized by being open and not closed under proprietary intellectual property. Because the more you have people in the network, or the more institutions in the network, the more everybody benefits. It's not a win-lose. And they scale best if they're laterally scaled rather than vertically integrated to get the network effect. So what this really means is we're moving toward a globalization that's rather than centralized and led by a handful of global companies and countries, we're moving to glocalization. Communities and regions are beginning to lay out and scale up this new infrastructure, this smart city, smart regions infrastructure. And because of the fixed and marginal costs are so low for virtually dealing with each other virtually and in physical reality, localities and regions are already beginning to network with each other all over the world in a more flat, laterally scaled, open, transparent fashion. So it's a real economic as well as social and political revolution.
Yes. So I've got a couple of follow-up questions that are related to each other. You know, that helps everyone set the stage for the way in which you understand the evolution of the different economies and the way that we've evolved. So facility folks typically are needing a plan. They're people that are present. They're people that know the facilities or the nodes really well. So what I would ask you is, do you have any insight into who needs to be brought to the discussion to create success in moving these ideas forward? Because the things that you talk about, the Internet of Things, the smart cities, the smart buildings, those are all kind of vertical discussions that IFMA has had developed over the last 10 years. Now we actually have something that we could understand in what you've done with the EU and China to understand what our place could be in that and who needs to be part of that discussion to get this to be successful.
Well, that's the best question you could have asked after the framework, because that's the most important. Here, it is pretty interesting. After 17 years, this has been in process, kind of developing this narrative and now the deployment plan since 2001. So it's not as if we are just, this magically came out of nowhere. And it's taken really the inputs of so many industries, so many institutions, so many individuals. But here's what we really finally realized, that this third industrial revolution, smart city, smart region, smart world infrastructure, it has to be deployed in a manner that is commensurate with the operational design of the infrastructure itself. So if you take a look at that first and second industrial revolution infrastructures of the 19th and 20th century, as I said, they were designed to be centralized, top-down, proprietary, closed intellectual property, vertically integrated, because that was the most efficient way to return the investment to shareholders, that process. But given the fact that the third industrial revolution infrastructure is so totally different, it requires a different way to scale it. Because that third industrial revolution architecturally, as we said, is distributed. It works best if it's open and transparent and not intellectually enclosed in terms of intellectual property, and it has to laterally scale. So what we realized in the European Union is that the way this is going to scale is the cities and the regions all have to develop their own customized roadmaps, and then those roadmaps have to embed all their existing and future programs within this larger architectural frame. Because the platform itself is distributed, transparent, and laterally scaled, and it favors globalization, regions dealing with regions, every region is going to be responsible for scaling. It will not come from the nation state down. The nation states will be able to provide regulation codes and standards and help transform standards from the second to the third industrial revolution, and they can provide incentives. But the actual build-outs are going to have to be in the regions. Now, then the question is, how do the regions do this? We've done several of these regional build-outs so far. I chair a consortium called the TIR Consulting LLC. It's made up of some of the leading engineering institutes and scientific institutes, and folks that are involved in all of these issues. We've got 3 test regions now. This will be interesting for your members. We have 3 current operational test regions in Europe where we developed roadmaps and deployment plans are now being executed. The oldest one now, the current deployment plan, is Haute-France, which is the old Rust Belt, of northern France, where the mining community was, the steel producing community, the auto region, and it was in dire straits 5 years ago. The region asked TR Consulting to come in. We've come in and worked together with them to develop a plan, and I'll go into the process in a moment. We're also going into our third year in the Netherlands. We did a joint plan with the 23 cities from Rotterdam to The Hague, which is a big industrial and petrochemical belt for Europe and agricultural belt. And finally, we are in our third year in Luxembourg, which is a nation state and a financial capital of Europe. And what we realize is that you have to have a completely different process of political engagement to create a more distributed, open, transparent system that allow you to scale. Let me preface this. Many of the folks that are in IFMA, they would like to do all these changes, but they can't scale it. So it's cost prohibitive to try to convince one apartment building or one commercial store or one factory to make this transition. It's just not cost effective. The only way you can scale it is if you can begin to be engaged with other companies across competencies, meaning the managers of the built environment and those who manage and own the built assets. They would have to partner with the power and utility industry and transport and logistics industry and the ICT industry and the telecom industry, blockchain into competencies, and then be able to scale entire areas. And to do that, for example, you'd want to scale a whole social housing district and say, we'd like to do the whole thing at one time, or an entire commercial area. We'd like to retrofit all the buildings and put in the big data centers and the Internet of Things technology and the charging stations across the entire commercial district, or an entire manufacturing district or technology park. The only way to get there is to change the approach to governance. So what we said to cities and regions is in the new era of distributed, open, transparent economy, we have to broaden democratic participation. A city and a region is no longer the decider and then bids out contracts for companies to create infrastructure. That system won't work because it ends up in all sorts of little siloed, isolated pilot projects that never get us to the new infrastructure. We've got 7,000 cities that have signed up to the climate agreement, and they all have these showcase projects to create green and digital sustainable cities, and they're all little pilot projects, all isolated, all on their own. In order to actually create a completely new transformational infrastructure, the city would bring together the entire region. They would bring together all of the business community, all of the civil society, the universities, the think tanks, the research institutes, and that's what we've done in these three regions. And the government would then be a facilitator, but not the decider. In other words, this is what we call assemblage democracy. It's distributed, open, transparent, and laterally scaled, just like the infrastructure we're setting in. So you'd have folks that manage the building assets would be crucial here because of the Internet of Things, and they are the nodes, those buildings. And you would be joining together for 9 or 10 months in these regional plans, orchestrated, if you will, or facilitated by government. But in the three regions we're in, over 300 people were engaged in all of the various committees, and several thousand people in various institutions were engaged at various levels beyond that. And over a 10-month period, TR Consulting worked in these regions with these huge assemblages. These were not stakeholder groups, focus groups. They were actually groups that had to put the plan together. We would work with them, but we wouldn't develop the plan for them. We would provide the technical expertise. And the reason this is important is because once a region becomes fully engaged, the high schools, the universities, all the businesses, all the sectors, the urban and rural communities, then they start to own it. And when they realize that they're empowered, not to just to come up with ideas, but to actually build out this roadmap, if you will, based on the architecture we laid out, the communication internet, the energy internet, the mobility internet, all connected to manage, power, and move the activity, all on top of that Internet of Things platform, which is the transformation of the building stock into nodes. Once the regions engage with having to customize for their region this basic architectural plan, over a 10-month period, they develop a roadmap, and we assist them. And these roadmaps can range up to 500 pages, 150,000-word roadmaps, in which they integrate all of their interests together. And so what they begin to see is their region is a 30-year construction site. Every architect will appreciate it. So we have the architectural plan, but then all the rooms in each region are going to be customized to their needs. But the plan for the entire house is a template. So if you see this as a 30-year construction site, that roadmap in the first year gives you the beginning of a long-term commitment. And then after the year one, you stay with these democratic assemblages. And year after year, they work with local government, the business community, the universities, the high schools, civil society, and they're responsible for coordinating across industries to create this infrastructure and to employ it. This is a new form of governance. Again, it's distributed, open, transparent governance, laterally scaled, that is commensurate with the platform, which is distributed, digital platform, which is distributed, open, transparent, and laterally scaled. This is where you get scale. Once a region is engaged in this, then, for example, in Haute France, they've taken whole social housing complexes, not just a few apartments, and they're retrofitting them. And then they're transforming them with solar and wind technologies, and they're putting in the Internet of Things and the charging stations because they have the commitments. There's no backlash. And they're going and dealing with entire commercial districts in Rotterdam to The Hague, industrial districts, agricultural districts. So this is the way it has to be done. And the scaling, I guess the next issue is how you finance it, but perhaps you have more questions on the process. This is really the process.
Right. But the thing that comes to mind as a facility professional is the things that you talk about are familiar to us. You talk about the charging station. You talk about hooking up alternative energy to the existing buildings. Mm-hmm. You talk about interoperability. I would wonder, do you have any sense of how prepared facility management professionals would be to start and be involved in a process like this? And this could be a very parochial question that you might not be able to answer, but I thought I'd at least ask from your experience in putting these roadmaps together.
They're not up to speed. And it's not because they don't know the technology. They do understand the technology. They understand how you put the technology in place. But what's missing is the overall narrative. So in other words, they like the rest of the community, the rest of society, they see each of these implementations as something that's internal to itself, and it ends up being a pilot or a partial project, but they never see the transformation. These are the only 3 regions of the world. Well, now we're doing it beginning in China, where they're getting full-scale integration of this infrastructure. Many other regions are wasting so much money because each project is a small test or pilot, and we're wasting valuable time. And we're not getting to the new infrastructure that brings together in one seamless platform the communication internet, which is helping to manage the energy internet, and that energy internet, which helps provide the energy, zero marginal cost solar and wind for the mobility internet, and all 3 of those internets riding on top of the built environment, which will be the big data centers, distributed data centers and micro power generation sites and charging stations. You have to put it all together. That requires a regional engagement. No single company that either owns assets, manages assets, commercial, industrial, or manufacturing, can do this on their own. Can't be done. You'll never scale it. How would you? But once you engage with other industries, all of which have to lay out this infrastructure, you can't lay out this infrastructure. If you're an asset manager of a commercial, industrial real estate, you have to bring in people who are companies that specialize in ICT or 5G data communication connection, power and utility companies, the mobility and logistics companies, the advanced fabrication manufacturing companies. They all have to be brought in. So you have to start to see yourself as part of a collaborative blockchain, if you will, across industries, and think of yourself as a competency, not an industry. Otherwise, what you'll end up doing, and this is what's happening all over the world, a building here, a building there gets LEED standards. You retrofit some old buildings here or there. It's not leading to that infrastructure transition. It's not connecting up all those three internets on top of that Internet of Things platform. You can only do that if regions start building out these roadmaps. Now, the roadmaps we've done are open source. It's available to everyone. You can just go up on our website and get them. But you have to be able to engage a city or a region, the governments, in actually working with industry, the universities, the research tanks and stuff to do this. It's not rocket science. And I'll give you an example. In Haute-France, that was the old, not only the old Rust Belt, it was really a region that was, the young people were leaving, the businesses were leaving, the old mining areas were completely reft with unemployment. It was really really in bad shape. 5 years later, it was awarded the Entrepreneurial Region of Europe of 350 regions. 5 years later, 970 projects, thousands of people employed, hundreds and hundreds of new projects, technology parks. That was all done because the people in the region came together and they said, okay, we can't rely on someone else to do this for us. All our businesses have to do this together. Our group, TR Consulting, said, we'll help you. And they did it. If they could do it in northern France, they could do it anywhere. That was a really depressed region.
Yes, yes.
This can be done everywhere.
You know, another question I have for you is really regarding what does it look like? How is it different once this the whole third industrial revolution is in place and functioning in a region? Do we have any examples of that, or in Europe or anywhere else that you could talk to?
Well, we are 5 year in our 5th year celebration this fall in Haute-France. The first year was the roadmap. The second year was putting together a deployment plan, and they've had the 3rd and 4th year now. There, you can come and see projects. There are delegations coming from all over the world, and they're seeing our new tech parks, and they're seeing the mobility and logistics, internet, all this stuff starting to emerge. And the other 2 test regions we have now, we're just finishing the 2nd year, which is the decision on the first part of the construction site. What are the 10 major projects that have to be done? And we're talking about billions of euros here, in the first stage of this deployment. This is a massive construction. So, yeah, you could come to each of these regions and visit and talk to the folks and see it. They're at various stages of this process, how they're doing. It's quite, what it does is it gives people a new sense of their own agency, their own ability to actually control their future destiny for their children, themselves and their children. They're not sitting there waiting for some government to come into office, or not waiting for maybe Google to locate one data center there. They're just empowering themselves to create their own distributed smart
their next or something like that. So do you?
Yeah.
Otherwise, like if you have an Amazon that's looking to put its next logistics center region, which everyone is very excited about now. So with these three,
pathetic because the regions give up everything to get one center there. They give up everything. They give up the taxes. They give up everything. And what do they get in return? A couple hundred jobs, maybe a couple thousand jobs. It's better to actually for the regions to control their own destiny and bring in Amazon once the regions are in charge, but on their terms.
Yes.
On the region's terms.
So the 3 major digital areas, communication, energy, and transportation, are all of those areas developed enough digitally to accommodate all that would be necessary for the 3rd industrial revolution?
Well, certainly the communication internet absolutely is there. We have to move now to broadband 5G big data. That's essential to have that broadband because the Internet of Things requires so much massive broadband. When you have billions of sensors providing data 24/7 across an entire region, that can't be done without broadband, and that's 5G. And that means the infrastructure is in, but they're going to have to move that communication internet to 5G broadband. That's a lot of underground cable that's going to have to be put in. But that's already there in a lot of places. I mean, that's not theoretical. The energy internet is definitely emerging. in Europe. We can show people all over Europe. Power and utility industries are now moving to digitalize the electricity grid, which is, the electricity grid has always been servomechanical and very old. We're now digitalizing it. And we have major power and utility companies who are making the transition to the new business model. In Germany, of the big four power companies, they're changing their business model fundamentally. It's already changed because what happened here is I work with Germany on this transition, the energy transition, with Vice Chancellor Sigmar Gabriel, who was in charge of it, and Frank Steinmeier and Chancellor Merkel. And we're now, I say, 9 or 10 years in, and we've got 35% of our electricity on the grid is solar and wind at zero marginal cost. The sun doesn't send a bill, and the wind doesn't send an invoice. So the fixed costs are plummeting. They're on an exponential curve like computer chips. The marginal costs are free. So it's a bonanza for productivity for German businesses. But what's interesting is that the big four power companies, EnBW, RWE, E.ON, and Vattenfall, what happened to them is what happened to the music industry, television, newspapers, and book publishing when digitalization reduced the marginal cost of entertainment, news, and knowledge. And it threw the existing industries into a disruption, created thousands of new businesses as well, some big, some small. So what's happened in Germany across Europe is farmer associations, small business associations, cooperatives, neighborhood associations all formed electricity cooperatives. And they went to the banks. They all got loans. No one turned down, because the banks knew they would pay back on the energy that they generated, so you couldn't default. And they're producing 96% of all the new power in Germany. The big four power companies can't scale it, so they're really out of it. They're not going to be producing solar and wind because you have to collect it everywhere. That's the buildings and around the sites and around the locations. So how can you imagine four power companies controlling every piece of real estate and every location, every site? Just won't happen. So what I said about 5 years ago, I debated, maybe 6 years ago now, the head of E.ON, Mr. Tyson, who's still there. And I said, look, you're not leaving the second industrial revolution tomorrow morning, but you got to have a game plan in place to make the shift over 20 years from a second industrial revolution business model to a third industrial revolution business model. And the disruption's now. The transition's 20 years, but you've got to move with that new business model now, or you won't be there. And I said, in the new business model, you make more money by not generating any electricity, because everyone's going to generate their own electricity and share what they don't need back to the power grid. And you'll make more money by generating no electricity, because that's just not in the game for you anymore. And the less electricity you actually sell, the more money you'll make. And that was pretty hard for him to deal with. Yeah. But what I said is the way you'll make money is you'll set up partnerships with thousands of businesses and enterprises, and you'll help manage the energy flows across their energy internets. You'll help them with their big data. You'll help them with their analytics. You'll help them with their algorithms. You'll help them create apps to help better manage the energy flowing through this energy internet, just like we now do managing information across the communication internet. And in return for helping those thousands of businesses manage the energy flow throughs in their supply chain and value chains to manage power and move their goods and services, to the extent that you increase the productivity of those companies by helping manage that energy and the data that goes with it, and you increase their efficiencies and increase their productivity and reduce their marginal costs, then those companies will share their productivity gains back with the power and utility companies. It's called performance contracts. So 5 or 6 years ago, when we had this debate, he demurred. He said, well, it wasn't ready. He did it last year. E.ON, he waited too long. E.ON put their fossil fuel and nuclear power on the marketplace. There's no bidders because it's all stranded assets across the world now. Fossil fuels are at $100 trillion of stranded assets, according to Citibank, their study, and the Bank of England studies on this. He waited too long, but they are moving into two businesses, and now they've joined with RWE, I believe it is. So, on generation and they're moving to energy services. All the big four are doing this. In France, ERDF has joined us, and EDF in northern France, where we're laying this out. They're not leaving nuclear tomorrow morning, but they're not stupid. You got to be in the new business model, which is managing energy services. The generation, solar and wind, is going to be generated by everyone where they live and work, back to the buildings. Solar, you're not only going to have solar on roofs. You know, we now have solar panels and we have thin film. They're now almost ready for prime time. They're putting solar in paint. They're putting solar in glass, in facades. Every building's going to be all over the world, wherever you go, in every little village. Everyone's going to be producing their own energy. And if the sun isn't out in one place, but the sun is out in another, if it blow or the wind's blowing someplace and not in another, you connect up so that you can share energy surpluses. And then if there's a lull where you are, you can get energy from anyone else on this distributed energy internet and share energy just the way you share information and knowledge. That's now not theoretical. That's being built out right now in parts of Europe. And in China, it is really moving fast. 11 weeks after my first formal visit with the leadership a number of years ago, they moved so quick. They announced a $82 billion investment in the upcoming 13th five-year plan, which is now here. And they are digitalizing the state grid, largest in the world, so that millions of Chinese people can buy solar and wind technology from their own companies because they're the largest producers of solar and wind. So the companies in China are now selling for the domestic market. So millions of people in their built environments, their homes, their offices, their factories, they will be producing solar and wind and off-grid or sharing it back on an electricity internet. And that's actually being operationalized as I speak to you in real time in the 13th five-year plan. And now we're moving to the mobility internet with the same thing. China's leading in electric vehicles. I serve as an advisor to Beijing Auto, which is the largest producer. And they're moving toward the mobility internet at a much faster clip than we are in Europe, in the U.S. Europe's moving at a pretty fast clip because we are passing legislation that outlaws the sale of internal combustion engines between 2035 and 2040 in countries around Europe. Same, China's going to be doing the same thing. You won't even be able to buy an internal combustion engine. That's actually been legislated in a number of countries already.
Well, Mr. Rifkin,
way ahead of the United States.
Really, kind of framing this out for us today. I do have one last question that I think some of our members might want to understand a little more. Is that there is the third industrial revolution, and then the World Economic Forum says it's the fourth industrial revolution. And I've heard people get all into a lot of discussion about this. And can you differentiate between what the World Economic Forum is talking about, which may be different than you are?
Yeah, there is no fourth industrial revolution. It's just, it does not exist. This was marketing hype by Mr. Schwab at the World Economic Forum. A couple of German companies, Bosch and others, had wanted to brand their fabrication manufacturing, so they called it 4.0. All of a sudden, it escalated. This is the fourth industrial revolution. It's nonsense. That's why people are confused. If you ask someone, what is the fourth industrial revolution, they will not be able to tell you. All they'll say is it's artificial intelligence, robotics, and genetics. They will not even be able to tell you what that means. The point is that all of the things that Mr. Schwab talks about, artificial intelligence and robotics and biotechnologies, they all rely on the digitalization of society. The first industrial revolution was steam power. The second industrial revolution was analog electricity. The third is digital. So whether it's artificial intelligence or whether it's robotics or whether it's bringing together the life sciences and chemistry and genetics, that's all advanced by the digitalization and interconnectivity of digital systems. So that's what it is. And I'm sorry that he did this, but it was confusing. He did when he said, he kind of said to me, he wrote me a note, Schwab, because I wrote a commentary about the hype on the World Economic Forum. And he said, well, your books have been a big influence in my thought processes for years and years. And then he said, but the thing is, I think that the digital internet revolution, what's happening is the digital revolution is moving so quickly that it's exponential. Therefore, the speed of the connectivity means we have to call it a fourth industrial revolution. It's just absurd, totally ridiculous. And if you ask any of the companies, all the global companies we work with, none of them talk about the fourth industrial revolution, maybe that I've heard of. And that's in the manufacturing and transport and logistics, and they don't even use the term.
Well, Mr. Rifkin,
it's more used in academia.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask you some questions, and you will be hearing from me or from others, on follow-up for this, and we're looking to put this out as a blog as well as a printed in our facility management journal, which IFMA puts out. So I wanted to thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I know the excitement of your ideas will continue with IFMA members and beyond.
Well, thanks, Bill. It's a pleasure to do this interview with you. I really enjoyed my time with IFMA, and we look forward to staying in touch, especially as we move these regional projects forward. We'll be announcing our first ones in North America within the next 3 weeks. We'll definitely get back to IFMA, and I know that your building asset manager will be involved with us in our first regional plans here in North America. So we're very much looking forward to the collaboration.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill. Good to talk with you.